You're listening to Lead the Shift. Each month, I sit down with leaders who can name the moment with clarity and point to the actions that actually move systems. We talk about what's breaking, what's emerging, and what will it take to build a future-proof economy with young adults at the center. If you're ready to lead, welcome home. Welcome to Lead the Shift. February carries two responsibilities: Black History Month and Black Futures Month. Black History tells us what our ancestors built under constraint, and Black Futures asks us what we are willing to build with power. At Leaders Up, we believe systems fail when experts ignore the people. We don't build systems for communities, we build them with communities. If we are honest, that requires power shifting from power over to power with, not just participation. Today, we are talking about youth power, Black power, collective power, not as a symbolism, but as infrastructure. I'm so honored to have my brother, Dr. David C. Turner III here, community engaged academic. He's real in the academic halls, but even realer in community and building power across the Alliance for Boys and Men of Color, collective power to the Brother Son Selves Collective, and a scholar who works inside systems but answers to community. This conversation is not about nostalgia. It's about design. It's about governance. It's about building power and ensuring who holds power in the Black future. David, let's start with history as strategy. Ella Baker believes strong people do not need strong leaders. They need strong communities. And SNCC, the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, was youth-led, not youth-advised. Again, it was youth-led. What would it mean to take Ella Baker seriously right now?
Man, can I give a brief example?
Exactly, you can. Absolutely, you can.
Yeah, man. So, oh man, when I was as a youth organizer, right? Like again, I got my start, organizing at this one org in Inglewood called the Social Justice Hunter Institute, and then from there I went to a coalition called the Brother Son Selves Coalition. And one of the things that our young people were always adamant about is that like youth voice should drive how we make decisions, right? So for us, right, I'll speak about my time as manager of the Brother Son Selves Coalition. We would get involved in campaigns that were not only like local, but also to statewide, right? So we would have our young people go through all the different campaigns, right, that people had asked us if we wanted to co-sponsor, if we wanted to like be a part of it. And there was one campaign in particular that got unanimous votes. And that campaign was the California Act to Save Lives, or what would be Assembly Bill 392, right? This bill essentially created parameters around law enforcement use of force. So that way the police couldn't just come and shoot you within 5 seconds of meeting you, right? Because that was California policy up until 2019, right? So this was one of the first times, right, that our young people got the chance to like drive the direction of the coalition. And again, this was a completely unanimous vote where every single young person that we worked with a coalition of over 9 organizations that service thousands of young people, like they all said, yes, this is our number one priority. We're locking in on this. So because we have partners who were also a part of this campaign, we got a chance to like really learn about not only the statewide process, but also young people got the opportunity to like make phone calls and phone bank, got a chance to meet legislators, and we were successful in helping to get that passed. Right. So big shout out to, our partners at like the Youth Justice Coalition and some of those other spaces. Right. But, had it have not been for our young people saying, look, all this other stuff is cool, but we locking in on this. Right. Like, that wouldn't have been our number one priority. Right. And I want to like preface this by saying that this was coming on the heels of what happened with Stephon Clark
Mm.
in Sacramento, and Christopher DeAndre Mitchell in Torrance, right? Two younger black men who were killed by law enforcement within 30 seconds of actually interacting with law enforcement, right? So our young people said, no, this is the priority and this is the direction we go in. So I mentioned that to say that it's so important for us to actually follow the lead of young people, right? Because they're the ones who have been impacted by these issues and they're the ones that's right. We just got to make sure that we provide them with the opportunities and space to actually lead.
Yeah, and that's so important, particularly in the context of Black history and what we've learned from the teaching and leadership of Ella Baker and the effects of her sharing power with the members of the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, where, from what I'm hearing from you, the work that you're leading right now does exactly that. It ensures that we're listening not for like testimony, but we're listening for actual insights and information and guidance around how to move forward. And there's a lot of organizations out here that are celebrating Black history, but still resisting Black power. When you hear that, what
Mm,
comes to mind, Dr. Turner?
man. Whew. Oh man, I'll tell you right now. I think one of the things that comes to mind for me is that it's very easy for not only organizations but entities, cities, people in philanthropy, the private sector, etc. Right? Like it's very easy for folks to celebrate Black history because then there's no accountability and just acknowledging
Mm,
what happened, right? But in order to actually acknowledge and then right support Black leadership then means, okay, so now what are we going to do about it, right? Now there's an accountability factor, right, that comes in. So these harms have happened, what do we do to rectify the harm, right?
mm-hmm.
And that is where what Stokely Carmichael, or who eventually changed his name to Kwame Ture, and I'm blanking on the other brother's name, when they wrote Charles Hamilton, when they wrote the book Black Power, Politics of Liberation, right? That was one of the most sold books in the late 1960s. And when they were talking about what Black Power is, right, it was about the Black community's ability to determine what is in its own best interest, right? But people oftentimes don't want to do that because for Black people to determine what's in our own best interest oftentimes goes against the interest of people who are already in power. So what happens when, regular everyday Black folks can actually go get jobs and not be relegated to, a surplus market where people end up, in poverty, working 3 and 4 jobs, or either, not working at all and end up incarcerated, right? Like, what happens, right, when our schools see the level of investment and the level of interest that actually keeps young people not only in schools but engaged, right?
Yeah.
Like, what happens, right, like when people can like afford, middle class lifestyles and like can afford a home, right? Like what happens when the Black community has access to these resources, has access to, these type of things? It uplifts everybody, right? So with that being said, right, like it's important, I think, especially to your question, to acknowledge that, like, yeah, people can engage with and sometimes even celebrate Black history because then, right, like they don't see themselves as accountable. But in order for us to actually move just away from like Black history to Black futures, right, that needs and necessitates Black leadership, as well as like ensuring that Black power, as defined by Carmichael and Hamilton, that like, our communities have the power to determine what is in our own best interest. And
Mm-hmm.
that doesn't
Mm-hmm.
come when you just have like a Dr. King type figure anymore. It comes when communities themselves are strong, right? When the people themselves are strong and can determine what is in their best interest. And that is where organizing comes into play.
I amen that and plus it up. Like at Leaders Up now, what we're focusing on is ensuring that we're shifting beyond youth voice to youth power building, in order
Mm-hmm.
to build a more future proof economy where young people can live, learn, and flourish. And I was recently on a podcast, and the host was asking me, well, where are the leaders? And I said to them, well, the leaders are in our community, because leadership now defined by millennials, Zers and beyond is dispersed. We no longer need a drum major. Um, with all due respect
Mm-hmm.
to Dr. Martin Luther King, what we need is community collective power building. And
Absolutely.
I'm wondering, given that you have a foot, and I hate to just shrink it down to this dichotomy, but you have a foot in academia and a foot in community, and have woven together two different institutional um, points of view into your work. How do you balance that? How do you wrestle with the study of the work and actually doing the work in order to actualize a powerful Black future?
Mm, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, for me, I had really great examples of people who were doing the work, like actually in communities, like building power, as well as like folks who were also scholars and who were working to help us redefine what it is we know, what we think we know about certain phenomenon, right? So different like scholar activists and organizers, right, that I was trained by, and like folks who I've interacted with, folks who I'm in community with now, right, like people like D'Artagnan Scorza,
Mm-hmm.
at the who's now the CEO for the Anti-Racism, Diversity, and Inclusion Initiative in the county, right? People outside of LA, right? Like some of the OGs, like Dylan Rodriguez out at UC Riverside, like David Stovall in Chicago, other scholars, right, like who, were very much so interested in building with community, right? And for me, those examples became how I understood, right, like my organizing and activism work, because what they teach you in the academy is that
Mm-hmm.
like, yeah, you a scholar activist, but you got to keep all that activism stuff over there, right? Like you don't bring all that over here, right? And what these different folks show me in very different ways, right? But what they show me is that no, these your intellectual projects and your political projects are the same, right? Because if you're really working to build power with communities, right, like the knowledge that you help to like get out there to the world, right, should be driven by what you're actually doing in community, right? And the skills and resources that you gain from the academy should benefit community and also should benefit movements, right? So for me, it was never a thing of like, is this going to be one issue or another. It was always one and the same, and I've always maintained that throughout my entire career, right? So while I was a PhD student, I was organizing at Brothers on Selves and with other formations like Black Lives Matter and other spaces. When I was in undergrad, I was at SJLI, right? Like when I'm now as a faculty member, I'm working with the Alliance of Boys and Men of Color, right? And also
Mm-hmm.
still, doing work with like the Police Free LAUSD Coalition and, the all the coalitions and spaces, right? So, the Alliance of Boys and Men of Color, et cetera, right? Like I say all this to say, right, that especially for people who might be interested in like pursuing academia and getting a PhD, but also staying connected to community, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like it is not going to be easy. You don't have to choose, but you have to be committed to what it is that you're doing, right? Because for me, right, like it was always about how do I leverage one space to build power in another, right? And how do we work to do this in a way that actually uplifts, Black people and all oppressed people across the globe, right? And that's been my work, since I decided that what's happening in the world is not acceptable and I want to do something about it.
Exactly, and I think one of the many things that I'm super impressed in your work is by your work, excuse me, is the Million Dollar Hoods Project. So can we double click on that project as I believe a clear example of you bridging academia and community and centering the voices and lived experience of community as actual lived wisdom.
Absolutely, absolutely. So, yeah, man, I'm the now second faculty director of the Million Dollar Hoods Project, which is founded by Dr. Cuddy Lotto Hernandez out of UCLA. I also want to lift up, her name, MacArthur
Mhm.
Genius, really, phenomenal sister. If you have not read her books, go read them. They're like literal movies. But, uh, but right, like I think with the Million Dollar Hoods Project, right, like our work is to map the fiscal and human costs of incarceration. So oftentimes when, I think especially post George Floyd, you would hear these conversations about defund the police, right? And like, well, what does that mean? And how are we actually going to be safe, right? Like Million Dollar Hoods was, before it was cool, right? Like working to create an infrastructure to help people understand how that could be possible and also just how much money we were actually spending on incarceration in the first place. Right. To give you an example of what this looks like in a 4 year span, right, between 2012 to 2016, in the on the east side of South Central, right? So that's east
Mhm.
of the 110 freeway for my folks who are not familiar with LA landscape, east of the 110 freeway, just south of the 10 and around the area of the 105. So like think Watts and all those other spaces. The LA County sheriffs spent nearly $70 million on incarcerating people in that one pocket, that one area in 4 years.
Mm.
In 4 years, right? So imagine, right, like what type of resources that community could have used that same $70 million for,
Mm.
right? Like just imagine, right? Like hell, let's not even take the full 70 million, right? Let's take 15. Now, as an executive director and a CEO, Jeffrey,
Mhm.
if I gave you a $15 million 4 year grant, just 15, we're not talking about 70, right? We're talking about like less than a fourth of that, right? Like how much you gonna get done with that much?
Well, first of all, that's three times my, organizational budget right now. You know what I'm
Yeah,
saying? So just
look.
be, the ability of us to be able to organize and to really challenge systems and transform them and from systems of harm to systems of healing and empowerment would be endless opportunities that we can do to achieve this systemically, right, in our communities.
And again, and that is with not even a fourth of what that budget was spent to incarcerate people just in that one pocket of LA, right? And we're not talking about Compton, East LA, the west side of South Central, like the Crenshaw district, Inglewood. We ain't talking about none of that. We talk about just the east side of South Central, right? Like, so again, the Million Dollar Hoods Project, what it does is it helps us actually not only put a number and a cost of how much this type of incarceration or like how much we're actually spending on this, but also, right, like we're working to elevate what are the ways that communities have experienced this kind
Mm.
of incarceration? How have communities
Mhm.
experienced this harm, right? Because it's one thing to say, oh yeah, police brutality, right? Now, while police brutality and police violence is absolutely real, right? Like that is just one piece of the puzzle here. Because the other violence where that doesn't involve bullets and batons, right, like is not only much more mundane, but it's also, right, like much more insidious and hostile. So the number one reason why are I'm sorry, not number one, the number three reasons why people get stopped in Los Angeles for in their vehicles, right? At all. Expired tags, driving with a suspended license, or failure to appear in court. Those are the top three reasons. We're not talking about committing serious traffic violations that compromise people's safety. We're not
Hmm.
talking about, people doing things that are like gonna harm other folks, right? Like these are the top three reasons for traffic violations, and these are the top three reasons for arrest in LA County, right? Again, you hear about all the stuff about gangs and all kind of other stuff, right?
Hmm.
Like, and especially post Prop 36, there's been this resurgence in tough on crime rhetoric, right? Where people keep talking about the smash and grabs and all kind of other stuff, right? Like, I'm sorry, but like crime has been on the serious decline over the last 20 years and a sharp decline over the last 10. And on top of that, right, like there's been so many resources poured into communities, but if you listen to the cops and the news, right, like you would think it's Gotham out here when it's not,
Right.
right? And on top of that, right, like we're spending so many resources on policing when we could be reinvesting those dollars into actually supporting and investing in communities, right? So the $1 Million Hoods project helps us tell this story, right? So not only how much money are we spending and how much harm are these institutions doing, but also to how are people experiencing it and what are people doing about it. And that
Hmm.
is the strength of the $1 Million Hoods project.
Yeah, and it's again a great example around this intersection between Black history and Black futures, and what you've done across the continuous arc of your work right now is being able to intersect the voice of community with the knowledge that we can ascertain through research and engagement, both traditional and non-traditional, to shift narratives based upon the facts. Right. The reality
Absolutely.
is that this isn't Gotham City. The to your point that violent crime has declined significantly and steeply over the years. And one of the things that also excites me about our work together through the Alliance of Boys and Men of Color and Leaders Up is something that we're doing on this upcoming Friday. Friday, I think it's the 27th. You know, your organization, the Alliance for Boys and Men of Color, a shout out to Eric Morrison Smith and his work and leadership there, has worked with Assemblymember Isaac Bryan to continue the work of the Select Committee on Boys and Men of Color, and we're having a hearing. Can you lay the groundwork and just share with us why that hearing is so important, and not just well, no, an intentional celebration, quite frankly, of what progress we've made, but also what possibility lies ahead based upon what we know is can be true by continuously listening to young people in order to build with them the Black future that we know we all deserve.
Mm, absolutely, absolutely. That's an excellent question. Well, first and foremost, right? Like, just for a little bit of context, right? The Select Committee for the Status of Boys and Men of Color was one of California's first initiatives, right, to really elevate, racial justice in a way that was specific and real, right? Post the election of Barack Obama. Right.
Mm.
So this happened in 2011, where we had sort of those first committee hearings, and then it began to grow and change from there. Right now, now with the select committee, its primary function is to elevate what's happening on the ground, right? So that way, state lawmakers can hear directly from communities what's going on, what's happening, and then can use that information to then craft policy that actually impacts these communities. So the select committee has been relatively dormant, right? Like, for the last couple of years. And now a champion who, comes out of community, right? Like Brother Isaac Bryan, is now the chair for the select committee for Boys and Men of Color. So with that being said, right, like the first issue, an issue that he, also directly worked on, is an issue connected to youth justice, right? Um, so for us in this particular event that we have coming up this Friday, if you want to come through, right, if you'll be seeing this before then, right, like pull up. We are meeting to talk about what or how has the youth justice landscape changed over the
Hmm.
last 10 years, right? Like, what have we won? What issues have been addressed, right? Like, also, too, what still needs to happen in order for us to build power, right?
Exactly.
So, to give you a quick example of what this looks like, right, in LA County, there has been a very intentional shift, right, to move away from youth incarceration to focus more explicitly, right, on youth development and to focus more on like actually supporting young people. Right. In 2012 in LA County, we were incarcerating, nearly 12, 13,000 kids a year. Right. And
Mm.
that's, and again, this is arresting, incarcerating, all these things. Right. That has dropped down. There are now less than 500 children incarcerated across the county, right? And that is because not only the work of the organizers on the ground, but also too, but the shifts that have created more opportunity for young people. But all because, right, like we have been able to create this massive shift and shrink the size of, you know, policing and incarceration and all these other things, doesn't mean that the work is done, right? Our work is far from done. Right now, the LA County probation, right, spends $1 million or $1.1 million
Mm.
per child, right, to keep those young people incarcerated. In addition to that, right, there's all of these other things that are still working to criminalize young people, even though they aren't quote unquote being arrested and incarcerated in the same ways, right? Like they're still being criminalized in so many other ways, right? And this is why it's so important for our work to still elevate or just to elevate the issues of boys and men of color, right? Because even though, right, like we've been able to shift a lot of things, right? Like it doesn't mean that the war is wrong, is won, right? Like racism took 400 years to build, and we are not going to dismantle it in 10 years with three-year grant cycles. That's not happening, right? Like so with that being said, right, like we are going to need to continue this fight, and the conversation on Friday is about us elevating not only what the issues currently are, but also too what has worked and what needs deeper investment, right?
Mhm.
There are so many excellent youth development organizations, youth driven organizations out there. I mean, yours over there at Leaders Up, right? Like the work that the folks are doing at the Social Justice Learning Institute, the organizing work that the young folks at Students Deserve are doing, and they're hosting an event this Saturday about the Black Student Achievement Plan and
Mhm.
its 50-year anniversary,
Yeah.
right? The work that some folks up there in Oakland are doing at Courage or Communities United for Restorative Youth Justice, right? Like the folks out there in San Diego, shout out to them, right? Like at Pillars for the Community, right? And the work that they're doing as formerly incarcerated bros, making sure that they support young people. Again, so many organizations are doing such excellent work, and it's so critical for us, right, to elevate that, because while we're also talking about the problems, we also want to talk about what has been working and make sure that we're doubling down on that investment.
Yeah. We're scaling it. Yeah. Absolutely. I mean, is black futures are not inevitable. Based upon what we've heard from Dr. Turner already, they must be organized, they must be resourced, and they must be governed differently. For our conversation on the status of the select committee on the status of boys and men of color. Um, Dr. Turner, when you imagine a just and equitable black future, what must be non-negotiable for black youth as it relates to power, ownership, and authority?
What must be non-negotiable? Wow.
The demand.
Woo! Man, I mean, there's a bunch of things that are non-negotiable, at least for me, right? Like, I think if I had to pick like top three,
Mm-hmm.
uh, first and foremost, right? Like, I think, and I've been, as a youth organizer, right? Like, I firmly believe that young people have the power to make decisions about their lives and about their communities, and oftentimes we don't listen to young people, but they are
Mm-hmm.
right. right? To give a historical example and a contemporary example, right? Like a lot of people, they might know Brown versus Board of Education as the famous court case that worked to desegregate the South, but they may not know the name of Barbara Johns. Barbara Johns was a sister in Virginia who she led a walkout at her school in 1951 because the
Mm-hmm.
conditions were so bad at her school. They were teaching classes on buses, right?
Mm.
Like and she could not accept that, and neither could her peers, right? So they started organizing to ensure that they can actually get access to an equal facility, right? So her school and her organizing caught the attention of the local NAACP, where they were able to successfully sue that particular school district, and their school district and her school was one of the 5 cases that were included in the Brown versus Board of Education case,
Mm-hmm.
right? But as we talk about this civil rights history, right, like we don't think about 16-year-olds helping
Right.
to lead right, like this process, right?
Mm-hmm.
So with that being said, to talk about like a contemporary example, right? Like with the in 2020 with the establishment of the Black Student Achievement Plan here in LAUSD, right? Like that came from redirected dollars that were meant to harm young people, right? Like through incarceration, school policing, etc.,
Mm-hmm.
right? And to put that money directly into serving Black students, right? And it was young people like Kalila Williams, who was a young person and a graduate of Student Deserve and is now a PhD student at USC.
Come
Right,
on.
it was like young people like Amir Casimir, who was an organizer with Brother Sun Cells, one of the young people I worked with. Right, graduated in 2020 and is now a full time community organizer over there. Right, like young people like Marche from Students Deserve, or Manuel Karunwi from the Social Justice Learning Institute, right? Like it's those young people that were working to drive the conversation around why we need to invest in Black folks, why we need to invest in Black students, and why we need to divest from policing, right? And through their tenacity, through their organizing, the support of Black parents, the support of Black teachers, the support of Black organizers, Black lawyers, all these things, right? Like that's how we won one of the largest cuts to school policing in the country, right? And also, right, like one of the more, I think, popular examples of what the invest divest strategy actually looks like in practice. So with that being said, when we're talking about like things that's non-negotiable, right, like actually listening to young people, right, and like helping them to see and invest in their leadership, that to me is non-negotiable.
And what's powerful is that over the last 6 years, we've been saying "say their name,"
Hmm.
particularly in reference to folks that have been harmed or killed or murdered as it relates to Black oppression. What I found invigorating, Dr. Turner, about the framing that you just provided is we're saying the names also of those that are leading, that are blazing a new trail, that are challenging the status quo. And I think that's one thing that, of many, that is critical, not just to our work across our organizations, but to expanding this movement as adults. We got to listen. We got to be curious,
Hmm.
you know,
Hmm.
and not just for advice, but for guidance. We know that in order to really build a Black future that is just and that is equitable, that is inclusive, that is sustainable, that's resilient, youth power is the infrastructure to do that.
A
Community
hundred
driven
percent.
systems change. Uh, Community driven systems change is not optional. It has to be core because those closest to the problems should be designing not just the solutions, but the systems that scale those solutions. And that Black futures require collective responsibility. So I'll say, number one, thank you, Dr. Turner, for joining us on Lead the Shift. And I'll also say to Policymakers, share your power. To educators, commit to co-designing new solutions. Funders, invest in youth leadership, not just services. Community leaders, organize boldly because the future is not something we inherit. It is something that we organize and co-construct together. Thank you so much, Dr. Turner, for joining us today. I appreciate you not just participating in this conversation, but walking the talk with me every day as we continue to work with young people across our county, our state, our nation to ensure that we definitely build a future that we know we all deserve. Thanks for listening to Lead the Shift. Take good care, everyone.
I'm shifting to the future now.